4:11 a.m., the Strait of Malacca. 34 nautical miles. Northwest of Singapore, the MT Ceres Voyager is a 330-meter crude oil supertanker sailing under a Greek flag, carrying 2.8 million barrels of Saudi crude from Ras Tanura to the Malicao refinery in Taiwan. She has been in transit for 9 days. Her AIS transponder identifies her position, course, and speed to every maritime authority within satellite range. She is exactly where she is supposed to be, doing exactly what she was contracted to do, in a waterway that carries 40% of the world's seaborne trade. At 4:11 a.m., two planned Type 056A corvettes, close to 800 meters on either side of her, and a planned Coast Guard vessel transmits on bridge-to-bridge Channel 16. Vessel MT Ceres Voyager. This is People's Liberation Army Navy Maritime Security Element. You are entering a People's Republic of China. Maritime Control. Corridor. Reduce speed to 4 knots and prepare for documentation inspection. Failure to comply will be interpreted as a hostile act. The master of the MT Ceres Voyager is 61 years old. He has sailed through the Strait of Malacca 214 times. He has never received a transmission like this one. He does not comply. He transmits on Channel 16. This is MT Ceres Voyager. We are in international waters transiting a recognized international strait under UNCLOS Article 38. We do not recognize your authority to impose inspection requirements. The planned Coast Guard vessel fires 2 warning shots across the MT Ceres Voyager's bow at 4:13 a.m. The master reduces speed. He also activates his vessel's distress signal at 4:13 a.m., transmits a mayday on Channel 16, and sends an emergency notification through the Inmarsat Maritime Safety Network. The Maritime Security Communications Center at Singapore receives the notification at 4:14 a.m. The U.S. 5th Fleet Duty Officer at NSA Bahrain receives the relay at 4:15 a.m. Indopacom receives the flash alert at 4:16 a.m. In the 5 minutes between the first planned transmission and the Indopacom alert, 3 additional commercial vessels in the Strait's northbound traffic lane receive similar transmissions from planned maritime elements. 2 comply immediately. 1. A Liberian-flagged container ship does not comply and is rammed by a planned Coast Guard vessel at 4:17 a.m., sustaining hull damage to its port side that forces it to anchor inside the Strait's navigable channel, partially blocking the northbound lane. 5 minutes. 3 vessels stopped, 1 disabled and blocking the channel. 1 supertanker with 2.8 million barrels of crude sitting at 4 knots under armed escort of 2 planned corvettes. The Strait of Malacca, the world's most important commercial shipping choke point, is functionally closed. The plan had calculated this moment for 16 months. The strategic logic was not complex, but it was layered. The Strait of Malacca carries 40% of global seaborne trade and 60% of East Asia's energy imports. It is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, wide enough that UNCLOS Article 38 transit passage rights are legally clear, narrow enough that planned vessels positioned on both sides of the shipping lanes create a de facto gauntlet. The legal ambiguity was the point. Planned Coast Guard vessels, not naval vessels, Coast Guard. The PRC had been expanding its Coast Guard's legal mandate and operational reach for 8 years. At what point does a Coast Guard inspection in international waters cross the threshold of naval blockade? That legal question, in a crisis, takes time to resolve. Time was what the plan was buying. The calculation. Every hour the strait was functionally closed, $2.1 billion in global trade was delayed or rerouted. Every hour of closure increased insurance premiums for vessels in the region. Every hour added to the diplomatic and legal pressure on regional partners, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, who depended on strait traffic for their own economic activity. And every hour was an hour in which the PRC could negotiate from a position of demonstrated control over a choke point it had no legal claim to but physical command of, in fact. The 16 months of planning had produced an operationally precise deployment. 8 planned Coast Guard vessels entered the Malacca Strait from the South China Sea on a staggered schedule over 4 days. Each transit logged as routine patrol activity, none triggering individual escalation thresholds. 4 Type 056A corvettes entered on the 5th day under the same cover. The communications relay vessel had been positioned at the strait's northern end 11 days earlier, registered as a survey vessel conducting hydrographic research. The operational architecture was assembled in plain sight, piece by piece, until the moment all pieces activated simultaneously. The flaw in the calculation. The U.S. had been preparing for this scenario for 3 years. Not this specific scenario, a planned maritime corridor declaration in the Malacca Strait. But the category of scenario, planned Coast Guard-enabled blockade of an international commercial waterway. The legal authorities, the engagement frameworks, the pre-positioned assets, and the diplomatic coordination with Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia had all been developed under an Indo-PACOM contingency planning program that had been running since the planned Coast Guard's operational expansion became visible to U.S. intelligence in 2021. At 4:16 a.m., the same minute Indo-PACOM received the flash alert. The duty commander activated Operation Straight Answer. Not a deliberate response after diplomatic consultation, a pre-authorized contingency response that required activation, not decision. The assets were already positioned. USS America, the 44,000-ton America-class amphibious assault ship, had been operating 340 kilometers south of the strait's southern entrance in the Singapore Strait approaches for 6 days. Officially, she was conducting a scheduled port visit preparation transit. Operationally, she had been positioned there 11 days earlier, when Indo-PACOM's intelligence picture showed elevated planned Coast Guard activity in the South China Sea corridor, approaching the Malacca approaches. Her F-35B air wing, 14 aircraft, 12 in strike configuration, was at 6-minute alert status when the flash alert arrived. At 4:18 a.m., USS America turned north at flank speed. At 4:19 a.m., the first 4 F-35Bs launched from her deck. Time from alert to first aircraft airborne, 3 minutes. The F-35B's short takeoff and vertical landing capability matters here. USS America does not have catapults. In the confined waters of the Singapore Strait and the Malacca approaches, operating at flank speed in a confined waterway, her F-35Bs can launch from a rolling deck without catapult assistance. The first 4 aircraft were airborne before USS America had cleared the Singapore Strait's eastern approach. The next 4 launched 8 minutes later, the final 4 12 minutes after that. 12 F-35Bs over the Malacca Strait at 4:47 a.m. The plan had 17 vessels in the strait, 2 Type 056A corvettes on each of 4 merchant vessels, 8 Coast Guard vessels conducting the documentation inspections, and 1 planned communications relay vessel positioned at the strait's northern end. None of the planned vessels were destroyers. None had HHQ-9 long-range air defense. The Type 056A corvettes carried YHQ-10 short-range point defense, effective against sea-skimming missiles at close range, not effective against F-35Bs at 40,000 feet. At 40,000 feet in the F-35B's sensor picture, the Malacca Strait looked like a crowded parking lot. 17 planned vessels, 4 stopped commercial ships, the disabled container ship anchored in the northbound channel, and 41 additional commercial vessels that had been stopped 80 kilometers north and south of the corridor by the plan's maritime security elements before they entered the declared zone. The F-35B's EOTS system resolved each planned vessel's type, configuration, and weapon status from altitude. The picture was transmitted to USS America's combat system and to Indo-PACOM in real time. At 4:49 a.m., the straight answer. Diplomatic notification was transmitted simultaneously to Beijing, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. To Beijing. The PRC's declared maritime control corridor had no legal basis under UNCLOS. The use of force against commercial vessels in international waters constituted an unlawful act, and U.S. forces were authorized to escort commercial vessels through the strait and to respond to any further use of force against commercial shipping. To Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, the notification of U.S. presence and intent, and a request for authorization for U.S. vessels to enter territorial waters adjacent to the strait if required for merchant vessel protection. Malaysia's authorization arrived at 4:54 a.m., Singapore's at 4:56 a.m., Indonesia's at 5:01 a.m. At 4:51 a.m., the lead F-35B descended to 8,000 feet and transmitted on plan guard frequency, the emergency channel monitored by all plan vessels. People's Liberation Army Navy, maritime elements in the Strait of Malacca. This is U.S. naval aviation. Your declared maritime control corridor has no basis in international law. Release all detained commercial vessels immediately. You have 15 minutes to comply. The planned Coast Guard commander aboard the relay vessel transmitted to Eastern Theater Command at 4:52 a.m. requesting guidance. Eastern Theater Command's response arrived at 4:57 a.m., 5 minutes into the 15-minute compliance window. Maintain positions. Do not fire first. Await further orders. The plan's operational architecture had planned for a U.S. diplomatic response. It had not planned for a U.S. military response at 4 minutes per sortie from a ship already inside the Singapore Strait approaches. The 15-minute window was designed to create a decision crisis in Beijing. Long enough that compliance was possible, short enough that delay was operationally meaningful. At 5 a.m., 9 minutes into the compliance window, 3 of the 4 stopped commercial vessels began moving. The planned corvette escorts on 2 of them pulled away. The MT Ceres Voyager's planned corvette escorts did not pull away. The supertanker remained at 4 knots under escort, now 14 nautical miles deeper into the strait. At 5:06 a.m., 15 minutes after the initial transmission, the lead F-35B transmitted again. Compliance window has elapsed. MT Ceres Voyager. Escort elements, you have 60 seconds to disengage from the vessel or U.S. forces will act to restore free navigation. The 60 seconds elapsed. The planned corvettes did not disengage. At 5:08 a.m., 2 F-35Bs descended to 2,000 feet and flew a direct overpass of the MT Ceres Voyager and her 2 corvette escorts at 400 knots, 500 feet above the corvette's masts. Not a weapons release. A signal. The corvette crews heard 2 F-35Bs at 400 knots and 500-foot altitude. The sound was unambiguous. The planned corvette on the MT Ceres Voyager's port side began to pull away at 5:09 a.m. The starboard corvette remained. Its commanding officer had received no updated orders. His last order was to maintain position. He maintained position. At 5:11 a.m., USS America reached the southern entrance of the Malacca Strait, and her lead elements, 2 MH-60R helicopters, launched toward the MT Ceres Voyager's position. The helicopters were armed with Hellfire missiles. They were not ordered to fire. They were ordered to establish a visible presence between the starboard corvette and the supertanker. The starboard corvette's commanding officer watched 2 armed MH-60R helicopters take up position 300 meters off his port bow. He transmitted to Eastern Theater Command at 5:13 a.m. Eastern Theater Command's response arrived at 5:16 a.m. Disengage. Return to formation. The starboard corvette pulled away from the MT Ceres Voyager at 5:17 a.m. The MT Ceres Voyager's master resumed standard transit speed at 5:18 a.m. 1 hour and 5 minutes after the warning shots across his bow, his vessel was free. He transmitted to the Singapore Maritime Security Communications Center at 5:19 a.m. All crew safe, resuming transit, no structural damage to vessel. The disabled container ship, anchored in the northbound channel after being rammed by the planned Coast Guard vessel at 4:17 a.m., was a different problem. Its portside hull breach required salvage assessment before it could be moved. A Singapore-flagged maritime salvage vessel reached its position at 7:14 a.m. The container ship was moved to anchorage outside the navigable channel at 9:47 a.m. The northbound lane was fully clear at 9:47 a.m. The strait had been functionally closed from 4:13 a.m. to 5:18 a.m. for the MT Ceres Voyager and the 3 other stopped vessels. 1 hour and 5 minutes of closure for the primary incident. The northbound lane had been partially obstructed for 5 hours and 34 minutes by the disabled container ship. The plan's 16-month operational plan had calculated a closure duration of 6 to 12 hours, long enough to produce measurable economic impact and force a diplomatic response on Beijing's terms. The actual closure: 1 hour 5 minutes for the main incident. The economic impact calculation: $2.1 billion per hour times 1.08 hours equals approximately $2.3 billion in delayed trade. Against the plan's target of $12 to $25 billion to create significant diplomatic pressure, Operation Straight Answer's offensive component activated at 4:22 a.m., 6 minutes after the flash alert, in parallel with the maritime response. The plan's 17 vessels in the strait were not the strategic center of gravity. The strategic center of gravity was the Plan Eastern Theater Command decision infrastructure that had authorized the operation and the Plan Coast Guard Command vessel network that was coordinating it. 41 Tomahawk Block 5 from USS America's surface screen and USS Bunker Hill, positioned 200 kilometers southwest of the strait, launched at 4:31 a.m. Their targets: 4 Plan Coast Guard Command and communications facilities in the South China Sea that were providing operational coordination to the strait operation, and the communications relay infrastructure connecting the Plan maritime security elements to Eastern Theater Command, not the vessels in the strait. The network behind the vessels. By 4:57 a.m., while the 15-minute compliance window was running, the Plan maritime security elements in the strait had lost contact with their primary coordination network. The Coast Guard vessels were operating on their last received orders, without updated guidance, without the ability to receive new instructions from Eastern Theater Command in real time. This is partly why the Starboard corvette's commanding officer maintained position past the compliance window. He had not received updated orders because the communications architecture that would have carried them was no longer functioning. At 5:04 a.m., the 4 Plan Coast Guard Command facilities received their Tomahawk packages. All 4 assessed as non-operational within 6 minutes of first impact. By 5:17 a.m., when the Starboard corvette finally disengaged, the Plan Maritime Security Coordination Network for the Strait operation had been non-operational for 13 minutes. The vessels in the strait were acting on their last received orders, disconnected from the command structure that had deployed them. In Dopacom's strike assessment at 6:14 a.m., 4 of 4 Plan Maritime Security Command facilities non-operational. Communications relay infrastructure. 3 of 4 nodes non-operational. Plan Maritime Security operation in the strait, uncoordinated and withdrawing. The 41 commercial vessels that had been stopped north and south of the declared corridor resumed transit at 5:44 a.m. after USS America's F-35Bs conducted a visual presence operation along the entire length of the corridor. None of the remaining Plan Coast Guard vessels attempted to stop them. The last Plan vessel cleared the strait's navigable channel at 6:31 a.m., moving south toward PRC-claimed waters in the South China Sea. The strait was open. All traffic was moving. At 6:47 a.m., the commanding officer of USS America received a flash message from Indopacom. Straight answer objectives complete. Maintain current disposition. Continue presence operations, she acknowledged. USS America held her position at the strait's southern entrance. Her F-35Bs maintained rotation overhead, 2 aircraft at altitude at all times, the remaining 10 cycling through recovery and relaunch. The northbound and southbound lanes were both flowing at standard transit density. The backlog of 41 commercial vessels that had been held north and south of the corridor was clearing at a rate of approximately 6 vessels per hour through the restored flow. At 7:14 a.m., the Singapore Maritime and Port Authority transmitted a formal notification to all vessels in the Malacca and Singapore Strait region. Navigation corridor fully restored. Normal transit operations resume. Planned maritime security elements have departed the area. So, any vessel experiencing interference should transmit immediately on Channel 16. No vessel transmitted on Channel 16 in response to that notification. The last planned Coast Guard vessel had cleared the Strait's navigable waters at 6:31 a.m. The 17-vessel maritime security element that had assembled over 4 days of staggered deployments had dispersed in 1 hour and 20 minutes. The diplomatic aftermath was already running before the last vessel left the Strait. Beijing's Foreign Ministry transmitted a statement at 6:09 a.m. asserting that the maritime security operation had been a lawful exercise of PRC jurisdiction over waters within its claimed exclusive economic zone, that U.S. military interference in a legitimate Coast Guard operation constituted an act of aggression, and that the PRC reserved the right to respond at a time and place of its choosing. The statement did not specify what response was reserved or what time and place was contemplated. It was a statement designed to create the appearance of retained agency over an outcome that had already been determined. The MT Ceres Voyager's master sent one final message to the Maritime Security Communications Center in Singapore at 6:52 a.m. as his vessel cleared into the Andaman Sea. The message was not required by protocol. He sent it anyway. All well. Transit complete. Thank you. He had been sailing the Malacca Strait for 37 years. He had never sent that message before. He had never needed to. From the first planned transmission at 4:11 a.m. to free navigation fully restored at 5:18 a.m., 1 hour and 7 minutes. From activation of Operation Straight Answer at 4:16 a.m. to last planned vessel clearing the Strait at 6:31 a.m., 2 hours and 15 minutes. Planned vessels deployed, 17. Planned Coast Guard command facilities targeted, 4. All 4 assessed as non-operational by 5:10 a.m. Communications relay nodes, 3 of 4 non-operational. Planned Maritime Security Coordination Network. Below operational threshold 13 minutes before the last corvette disengaged. Commercial vessels stopped in the corridor. 4. Released, 3 by 5 a.m., 1 by 5:18 a.m. Commercial vessels held in the backlog north and south of the corridor. 41. All resumed transit by 5:44 a.m. Disabled container ship. Cleared from navigable channel at 9:47 a.m. U.S. and Allied assets. 0 injuries. 12 F-35Bs employed without damage. 41 Tomahawk rounds expended. 2 MH-60R helicopters employed without incident. Cost of U.S. response munitions, 41 Tomahawks at $2.09 million each, $85.7 million. F-35B sortie cost, approximately $1.7 million. Total response cost, under $90 million. Estimated economic cost of disruption to global trade, $2.3 billion in delayed commerce at $2.1 billion per hour for approximately 1.1 hours of functional closure. The plan's 16 months of planning and 4-day assembly of 17 vessels had produced $2.3 billion in disruption, resolved at a U.S. response cost of under $90 million. The exchange ratio was not the relevant metric. The relevant metric was the Strait was open at 5:18 a.m., and a planned command network that had taken 16 months to build was non-operational at 5:04 a.m. The plan would rebuild the command network. The Tomahawk reload cycle at USS America's surface screen would take 72 hours. Both sides knew their own reconstitution timelines. What the plan's planners were now computing, in the hours after the last Coast Guard vessel cleared the Strait, was the gap between their timeline and the U.S. timeline. The gap had been 16 months of planning versus 3 years of contingency development, compressed into 1 hour and 7 minutes of execution. That gap was the accounting. Everything else was diplomatic paperwork.